Coming up next, trains and locomotives.
That portion of the North American continent between the western Great Lakes and the Rocky Mountains sometimes is known as the breadbasket because of its agriculture. From the late 1860s until the present, the Prairie Railroads have had a great deal to do with both the development and the transportation of that agricultural largesse. At one time, the Midwestern lines acquired the name Granger Roads. To tell us how that came about, here is author and rail historian Jim Neubauer.
I once wrote an article for a railroad company's employee magazine and wished to give the railroad a geographic identity. I used the prefix Granger Road to describe the Rock Island's Midwest location. The editor of the magazine was quick to use the proofreader's delete mark, and I was quick to learn a lesson in 19th century railroad economics and politics as opposed to mere geography. Rail rates often were unfair and seemed to gouge farmers. In the 1870s, railroads were monopolistic and unregulated. The National Grange of the Patrons of Husbandry formed lodges or granges to aid the farmer. The Educational Fraternal Order was started in 1867. The Grange went from a farmer's help to a crusading political organization with clout. This then worked to have state legislatures enact railroad regulatory laws which would fetter the railroads and end price gouging. Tariffs and railroad operations were of no concern to the railroad commissioners installed by Grange-inspired laws. They prescribed rates and schedules to the detriment of struggling railroads such as the Minneapolis and St. Louis. The quickly enacted legislation made eastern capitals stay away from prairie rail investment until the laws were repealed or changed. Eventually, national regulation came with the establishment of the Interstate Commerce Commission, which replaced Grange-sponsored legislation in individual states. So, 80 years later, copy would still be edited because of the ill will between the farmers and the railroad managements.
For our purposes, Granger roads carry farm produce. The major roads included the Santa Fe, Burlington, Northwestern, Milwaukee Road, Minneapolis and St. Louis, Rock Island, and the Soo Line. Now, to some extent, the Iowa interurbans, such as the Fort Dodge line, which interchanged traffic with the Chicago Great Western, were considered Granger roads. Not necessarily Grangers, but nevertheless operating in the upper Midwest prairies were the Northern Pacific and the Great Northern. The official Rock Island history, entitled Iron Road to Empire and written by William Edward Hayes, ignored the tumultuous years of the Grange, but the Rock Island, with its lines in Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, Kansas, Nebraska, Minnesota, and South Dakota, reached into the heart of the grain belt. A former executive and engineer for both the Rock Island and the Northwestern is Phil Weibler.
The Rock Island, of course, started as the Chicago and Rock Island in 1852, and its first line was just that, Chicago to Rock Island. Over the years, the Rock Island absorbed many other railroads, which is how it got to a lot of its terminal points. The Burlington, Cedar Rapids, and Northern got it in through Iowa and into Minnesota. Chicago, Kansas, and Nebraska got it across into Colorado. The Choctaw, Oklahoma, and Gulf was the basis for the line from Memphis across to Tucumcari. For the Railroad Fair of Chicago in 1948, the Rock Island managed to come up with a genuine old-time steam locomotive, courtesy of the Warren and Washita Valley in Arkansas. The Rock Island swapped the short line, a brand new diesel, to get the steam locomotive up to the Railroad Fair. Originally, they put it under number 801 since they thought it was a 260, although actually it was a 460, as we all know. For the centennial of the Rock Island in 1952, the Rock Island renumbered it as Old Number 9, and it traveled throughout the Rock Island system, towing what was called a palace car. The palace car actually started out as a lounge car in the late 1890s. It had gotten converted into a work train car probably in the 1930s. And in the late 1940s, it was resurrected and recreated as a palace car. The Rock Island had the largest fleet of 484s of any railroad in the United States. The first group, which was built in the late 1920s, was some of the first 484s in the country. The 5000 series numbered 65 engines by the time the class was complete. In 1944, the Rock Island went back to Alco to get another 10 oil-burning 484s in the 5100 series. In 1946, they went back and got 10 more coal-burning 5100s. Generally on the Rock Island, the oil burners were west of Kansas City. The coal burners were east of Kansas City, running into Chicago. But the really extraordinary locomotive on the Rock Island is the 482, the high-numbered 4000s, which were used exclusively in passenger service up until the very end. The scenes you see here on the slip track at Silvis, they're testing a 482, testing valve gear arrangements, testing exhaust stack arrangements to get a really quick, high horsepower passenger locomotive. That's what they were looking for in the 4000s. Story is told about one engineer out in Kansas said the brakes were no good on his train. Going right by his regular station stops. Just going right by the platform, says the train wouldn't stop. Oh, what it was is that 482, it had a completely redesigned exhaust nozzle. It was much more efficient, but it was also much quieter. And at that time, engineers ran by their ear mostly. They listened to what the locomotive was saying. They ran by their ear, ran somewhat by their watch. But the problem with the brakes was the fact that the locomotive was probably going over 100 miles an hour when the engineer figured he was only doing maybe 85. John D. Farrington assumed presidency of the Rock Island in the mid-1930s. Farrington was the one who introduced the rocket streamliners which were known throughout the country. The Rock Island Rocket grew to a fleet that extended to virtually every part of the Rock Island Railroad. Farrington also engineered numerous line straightenings and upgradings all along the Rock Island, especially through Iowa, Missouri, and down into the Southwest. A lasting monument to Farrington's vision is the Sampson of the Cimarron, huge modern bridge built across the Cimarron River in the 1940s. Of course, a common denominator for Granger railroads was handling of agricultural products. The Rock Island handled a diverse mix of rice from Arkansas, fresh produce from the West Coast, and of course, wheat, corn, barley from the Midwest. All of this was covered by tariffs, registered with the Interstate Commerce Commission, a tariff for wheat, flour, corn, rye, oats, and barley in carload, grain in carloads to East Clinton, Illinois, grain and flour in carloads. All of this, every movement of grain or any agricultural product was all covered by these tariffs. The Rock Island went everywhere you could possibly want to go with a Midwestern railroad, except they managed to get into Memphis, Houston, Minneapolis, Denver, into Tucumcari, New Mexico, always on somebody else's tracks. And I don't know what the figure is now, but there's probably still 50% of the Rock Island is being operated by other railroads. The Northwestern bought what they referred to as the spine line out of Minneapolis to Kansas City to serve the grain-producing areas of Iowa. That came right from the Rock Island. The Cotton Belt bought the line from the west into Kansas City, and they also own the line across to St. Louis. The suburban line in Chicago, of course, is operated by Metra. So much of the Rock Island still exists, but the good old Rock Island as we knew it is gone.
The Corn Belt Rocket, the Twin Star Rocket, the Rocky Mountain Rocket, and the Golden State Limited Streamliners cruised the Rock Island system. Everybody talks about lightweight trains, Farrington said to his operating vice president, Downing Jenks. Let's build one. The ultimate train, the jet rocket, was a result, and the company's commissioned artist, Howard Fogg, painted its portrait. When Rock Island built the first bridge across the Mississippi River in 1856, it changed America's economic axis from north to south along the river system to an east-west orientation. Abraham Lincoln defended the railroad's right to bridge a navigable stream after the steamboat F.E. Afton collided with the original bridge and set it afire 2 weeks after it opened. Rock Island celebrated the 100th anniversary of the bridge opening in April 1956 with Old Number 9 and train, which ran from Rock Island, Illinois to Davenport, Iowa. Many of the Prairie railroads had suburban trains serving commuters at Chicago. The Northwestern and the Milwaukee Road had what they called scoots. The Burlington called its suburban trains dinkies. The Rock Island called its commuter trains dummies. No less an authority than artist Howard Fogg called his paint scheme the best ever applied to a GP7. Elko road switchers were called flying barber poles by commuters and fans.
If you're turning 65, it's
Rock Island line is a mighty good road if you want to ride a got a ticket like you find it, buy a ticket at the station on the Rock Island Line.